Recording. Ready? Zoom people, can you hear?
Yeah, I see it. It's on.
Okay. If I see any messages popping up, I'll try to let you know.
I'm going to listen to it right now. I'm going to go listen.
Okay.
It is up. See, look.
Yeah. I see, yeah, it's picking up the volume. Okay, good morning. We begin by thanking the sponsors. We thank the Talmud Torah sponsor for the month, Shmuley and Lee Badinowitz, for his chus and Elias and Shama for her parents of Ram, Ben, her of Binyamin Moshe, then Shama Shav and Liam and family Shav and Achama. And the week of learning is sponsored by Ira and Miriam Grossman in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Ira's beloved mother, Freda Grossman, Freda Bashmuel, and Shama Shav and Leah, and the family Shav and Achama. Thank you for your sponsorship. Okay, today's Amud is Daf Yud Ches 18 in Maseches Kesuvos. We are going to pick up with a quick review of what we were discussing yesterday on Daf Yud Zayin and finish that discussion today. So, if you remember in the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in this parak, we had a memra from Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua said that if a person walks over to somebody and says to him, "The following field used to belong to your father, but while it's true that the following field belonged to your father, I purchased it from your father, and therefore now it's mine." The halacha is he is believed, and the Mishnah explains since he's the one who incriminated himself, he's the one who admitted that the field used to belong to this person's father in the first place, and without his admission, nobody would have known that. He is also believed to say that he purchased the field and now it's his, because he could have just chosen not to say anything, and nobody would have been able to come over to him and say the field doesn't belong to you. So the fact that he incriminated himself by saying the field used to belong to your father should not make him lose out on anything, and he could actually explain, well, it's true that it used to belong to your father, now it belongs to me because I paid for it. The Gemara yesterday was trying to figure out why does Rabbi Yehoshua need to specifically mention his halacha of hapesha aser hu hapesha hitter, which is essentially all he's trying to bring out, the concept that a person can say something incriminating and then clarify it and then he'll be believed. Why does it have to be specifically a case where he was addressing the person's father's field? Why can't it be a case which is directly related to the individual that he's talking to? Why can't it just be he walks over to somebody and says, this field used to belong to you, and it's true it used to belong to you, but I bought it from you? And the answer that we've given up until now is that we want both sides of the discussion to be true, and the side of the discussion which is v'im yesh edim, if there is external evidence that the field belonged to somebody else. For example, there are edim, there are witnesses who came by and said the field used to belong to this person's father. So he's not going to be believed to say that he bought it unless he could prove, he could produce some sort of proof of purchase. And it has to be consistent in all those cases. And yesterday we discussed it with regard to the halachas of chazaka, and the halachas of chazaka, which we explained yesterday, were that once a person lives in a field for an extended period of time, for 3 years, and nobody came by and protested his ownership, nobody called him a squatter, nobody tried to kick him out during those 3 years, he can therefore stay there forever as long as he has a valid claim as to how he got the field. And we explained why it was relevant, and that would only be relevant if it was his father's field. In other words, if we were talking about a field that belonged to a specific person, so then we can have a question about the chazaka. If we're talking about a field that belonged to his father, then we found a case where the chazaka wouldn't help. Why? It was talking about a case where the father died in the middle of those 3 years, and he was a child when he took ownership over it, and therefore the fact that he's living there for a long time doesn't help, because this is a child over here, and therefore he maintains his status as a child even though he grew up. Therefore the chazaka won't work, and that's why it has to be that specific case. Now the Gemara talked about another case. The Gemara asked, why can't we be talking about, if you go to the first wide line in Daf Yud Zayin and Beis, just a quick review, why can't we talk about the Gemara says l'snai b'didei v'lukma k'gon she'achla shtayim b'fanav achas shlo b'fanav? Why can't it be a case where he lived there for 2 years and the chazaka happened for 2 years in front of the actual owner of the field, but but then he had to leave, and the Gemara ultimately explained that that couldn't be a case because we hold that a person can make a chazaka, can make a macha. A person can protest the ownership of the field, afilu shelo b'fanav. In other words, if somebody is living in my field, it is incumbent upon me to go to the person and say, get out. Now, how do I have to do that? I can either walk over to the person and say, hey, listen, you moved in, you're not invited here, you didn't buy the field, you didn't purchase the field, I didn't give it to you, you need to leave, it's mine. Another way of doing it is going over to other people and saying, my dear friends, I'd like to let you know, I own the property at the following address. Somebody is living there, and I want you to know he has no permission to live there, he doesn't belong there, and that would be a good enough protest that would invalidate the chazaka. So the fact that he's not there is irrelevant because he could have made the macha even shelo b'fanav. That's a basic summary of what we had up until yesterday. And we discussed the case of Yehuda and Galil, and we explained that in Yehuda and Galil things were different because there was a cherem and there were circumstances that did not allow travel from one place to the next. So if you were in Yehuda, you were still able to make a macha, a protest in Yehuda about other properties in Yehuda. If you were in Galil, you were able to protest about other properties in Galil, even if you weren't in front of the person. But from Yehuda to Galil, you couldn't, because even if you did make that protest, you did protest somebody else squatting on your property, nevertheless, the message won't get back to the people in the other community because there wasn't any traveling. Gemara says, why did we choose Yehuda and Galil? Gemara answers the Stam Yehuda v'Galil kishas cherem dami. In Yehuda and Galil, there was such limited travel from one place to the next, and that was always considered to be a place which was kishas cherem, and that was a prime example of a place that did not have messengers going back and forth. Now, if you look at the top Tosfos, Tosfos points out this is a little bit inconsistent to Gemara in Maseches Gittin, because in Maseches Gittin, it seems to explain. Let's just see it inside. Beretz Yisrael ein tzarach lomer b'fonei nechtam b'fonei nechtam afilim Yehuda legalo mishum dika ole regalim ubate dinim ve'edim mitzuyim lekaimo. It seems like the concept of b'fonei nechtam, we'll get to that in Maseches Gittin, is again authenticating a get, that it was written and signed in front of you. A shliach, a messenger who carries the get, the divorce document has to make that proclamation that it was signed and written in front of him. And it says, in Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to do that because of all the travel from one place to the next. So now, it's interesting, Tosfos just points out, the hasam ha'isha machzeres achar edikiyam. In that case, the woman wants to make sure that the divorce actually went through, so she spends time trying to find people who traveled, who came to Eretz Yisrael and passed through those areas. Since she's looking for those people, there's always people to find. A person who moved into someone else's property and just settled there, he's not spending his time looking around. Did anybody come from Galil? Anybody traveling up over here? Did you hear him make a macha? It's not part of his agenda for his day. So what Tosfos is pointing out is, you definitely can find people who are traveling from one place to the next. It's definitely plausible that people will go from one place to the next and carry the message, but they're not very common. If you're looking for them, like the woman who wants to authenticate her divorce document, yes, indeed, she'll find them, but no squatter is looking for the owner of the field and his protest against them living there. It has to actually flow through much more freely. So now the Gemara asks a question. Why does Rabbi Yehuda have to say his case, his halacha of pesh aser, pesh hiter, in the case of the father in the field? V'lisni moder Yeshua ba'omer lechavero, mana lavisi mimcha uparati lecha shehunam. Why does it have to be a case of real estate where a person is talking about the original owner of the field and then a purchase of the property? Why can't it simply be a person who walks over to somebody and says, I borrowed $100 from you, but I paid you back? In other words, a pesha aser, I incriminate myself by saying that I am in debt to you of $100, but then I take myself out of debt by saying I paid you back. The Gemara said, remember, we have to have both halachas of the Mishnah being true, which is Mishum tegapoil misni seifim yesh edim shehu lava mimenu v'hu omar parati eino neman. The flip side would have to be that if Edim, witnesses come by and testify that you borrowed $100, and then you say, but I paid back, the halacha would have to be that you're not neman, you're not believed. But that is not true. Why? A person who lends his friend money in front of Edim, eino tzarach lefaro be'edim. He is not obligated to pay him back with Edim. So the halacha is simply not true. He could borrow with Edim and then simply pay back without the Edim. So therefore the second half of the halacha would not have been true, and therefore the Mishnah cannot give a case of pesha asar, pesha hitter by a loan where a person admits the loan on his own and then retracts and says, I paid you back. So the Gemara says, okay, why don't we choose another case? V'lisni moder Rabbi Yehoshua ba'omer lachaveru mana la'avicha biyadi. Your father lent me $100. In other words, mana lavicha, there's a mana which belongs to your father, which is in my hands. In other words, I owe your father $100. However, ve'achaltiv pras, I paid back half of it. I gave back part of it. Shehu neman, he's believed. Why? Because he's the one who started off this conversation by saying that I owe your father money, and he should be the one who should be believed to ultimately say, but I paid back half of the loan. The Gemara says that's very nice. That actually would have worked. It would have been a very good case. The only problem with that case is that it's not true, which is a small detail. Because the Gemara says, Aliba Deman. Who is this going according to? If this is following the opinion of the Rabbanan, we're going to get to this machlokas in just a minute. The Rabbanan say he is a Meshav Aveda. In a case like this, where a person walks over to somebody and simply acknowledges that he owes his father money, it's just like returning a lost object. Because when a lost object is lost, the owner of the object can't get it. He can't access it without the Meshav Aveda. In this case as well, the person is a Meshav Aveda. He's returning a lost object because it's a loan that cannot be identified without this person himself acknowledging that he borrowed the money. If this is following the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Amar Shvua Bay. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says he still needs to make a Shvua of Modeh B'Miktzas. And we're going to see this in just a second. The Tanya, for we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, Pa'amim, there are cases, Sha'adam nishpa al tainas atzmo. The person needs to take an oath based upon his own claim. So let's just quickly review. The halacha is, if I walk over to somebody and say to him, Mana li biyadcha, which means, you owe me $100. And the person says to me, Lahadam, lohaya devarim me'olam, which means, I am entirely denying the entire loan. I say you owe me $100. The person says, you were dreaming. I never borrowed $100 from you. The whole story is just made up. In that case, obviously, if I would like to extract money from him, I would have to find some type of proof that he owes me the money. I would have to pull out some type of contract, some type of agreement, a written contract. I would have to have Eidim, some type of evidence that the person owes me money. Because if he denies it, he's off the hook. It happens to be that the Chachamim instituted something called the Shavuos Heses, which is a Shavua, an oath, which is midrabanan in that case, but midoraisa, if a person denies owing the money, he does not have to pay anything back. If the person says, it's true that I borrowed money from you, but I only borrowed 50, and therefore I only owe you 50, midoraisa, the Torah obligates this person to take an oath that he only owes 50. We're going to see why very soon. In other words, admitting to the loan, admitting that the loan exists puts you in a little bit more of a vulnerable place than denying the entire loan. If you deny the whole thing, you're off the hook, scot-free min Torah. If you admit to part of the loan, you have to take a shvua called a shvua of Modeh B'Miktzas. So how about this case? Person walks over to somebody and voluntarily says, I am in Modeh B'Miktzas. He walks over to him and says, I owe your father money, but only half of it. So Rabbi Elazar says, there are times, there are times when a person needs to take an oath based on his own claim. Ketzad, what's the example? Mana la'avicha biyati. Your father has a mana in my hands, v'he'achaltiv pras, and I paid back half of it. Says Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Hareza Nishba, he needs to take an oath of Moda b'miktzas. V'zehu, and this is the case, Shenishba tainas atzma, v'chachamim omrim, chachamim say, Eino ela k'meshav aveda upater. He is only like Emeshav aveda, and he is pater. So now, let's just take a break for a second. Why is this opinion like nobody? In other words, if Rabbi Yehuda said this halacha, why would it follow nobody? If you look at Rashi, Aliba Deman, he says, Tanai pligi baha milsa b'shavus. This is a machlokas in Shavuos. V'i amar Rabbi Yeshua hachi lo kechad minayu. If Rabbi Yeshua said this halacha, pesha aser, pesha hitir, then he's saying, and he said it in the case of a person acknowledging a loan to someone's father, he would be like nobody. Chachamim take their case so far as to say, even if he's asking him for the money, if he admits it and then explains that I paid back half, then he's a Meshav Aveda. He doesn't have to take anything. So it doesn't have to be a case where a person initiates the discussion on his own. Remember, our case in the Mishnah was the case of Ein Shar Shachat Lefanech. We explained that term, which means there is no question mark before this person walks up. So Rabbi Yeshua's halacha is not going to be true because Rabbi Yeshua's halacha would extend even to the case of the Chachamim, where the person actually says, hey, you owe my father money. So therefore, it can't follow anyone's opinion. Now the Gemara now gets into this discussion of the Chachamim and Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. And the Gemara asks, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov less the Meshav Aved Pater? This is a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah which is Mefureshes, which says if a person is doing a service for somebody else, a person goes out of their way to try to help somebody, then we don't start making their life difficult. So in other words, the concept of Meshav Aved is a person finds a lost object. If you're going to start making this person take all kinds of shavuos and make his life difficult to return it, you know what the person's going to say? Mali atzara azos. What do I need to get busy with returning lost articles to people? It makes my life difficult. I have to take a shavua and have all types of responsibilities. Why should I bother with this? And therefore, for Tikkun Olam, to make the world a better place, you want people to have an easier time returning lost articles. We try to make their life a little bit easier for them. So now, this machlokas between Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov and the Chachamim seems to indicate that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov does not hold of the halacha of Meshav Aveda, because he's about to make this guy take a shavua. For what reason? Because he voluntarily went and offered to pay back a loan. So the Gemara says, of course he holds of that. Of course he holds of the concept of Meshav Aveda. However, Amar Rav, in this case, Betoano Kata. We're talking about a case where the child was a katan. So it wasn't like he voluntarily just walked up and said, hey, by the way, I owe your father money. It's talking about where the child walks over to him and says, hey, sir, I believe you owe my father money. You know, his father passed away, and the kid walks over and says, you owe my father money. So now the problem is very nice that the child initiated this discussion, but generally when a child comes over and initiates a claim, we don't really assume the child knows his father's affairs that well. And therefore, a person never would go so far as to take a shavua, which is a very serious thing, based on the claim of a child. So Gemara says, no. This is not just a regular katan. My katan, gadol. The child is a katan. Now obviously, the Gemara is going to say, if he's a child, don't call him an adult. If he's an adult, don't call him a child. So the Gemara says, when it says katan, it doesn't mean a katan in the halachic terminology of being a child. What it means is, Dilegabe mili da'aviv katanhu. What it means is he's his father's young child. Not that he is under the age of bar mitzvah, who falls into the halachic category of a katan, but he's his father's child. Why do we think this kid, just because he's his father's biological son, all of a sudden knows all of his father's financial affairs? That's not how it works. You don't get to know everything about your father just because you're related to him. So therefore, there is some type of weakness within this claim by virtue of the fact that he's a child. So the Gemara says, hold, I'm confused. Ihachi, tainas atzmo, tainas acherimhu. We just undermined the whole halacha of Rav Elazar ben Yaakov. Elazar ben Yaakov says there are times when a person is obligated to take his shavua based on his own claim. Here we're talking about an adult child. He walks over to somebody and says, hey, you owe my father money. So why is that tainas atzmo? Why is that his own admission, his own claim? So the Gemara says, tainas acherim, this is someone else's claim, v'hodas atzmo, but his own admission. The Gemara says, thank you very much. Kulhi ta'anasa, tainas acherim, v'hodas atzmo ninu. That's how it always works, my friend. A person walks over to somebody and says, you owe me $100, and he responds and says, it's true I borrowed money, but I only owe $50. Every time we have a discussion like this, it's tainas acherim, somebody else comes and makes the claim, and you have your admission, albeit in this case only for half the money. So Gemara says we have to change courses. It must be we're misunderstanding the entire machlokas between Rav Elazar ben Yaakov and the Chachamim. Ella hacha b'derabba kamifliki. Here, their machlokas is based upon the statement of Rabbah. And this is something very important to know. This is a very important Shas concept. If you look at the side of your Gemara, you're going to see that this is quoted to Amar Rabbah. It's in Gittin, it's in Bava Kama, and it appears at least 3 times in Maseches Shavuos. So here we are in Maseches Kesuvos, which precedes all of that. So we're having our first introduction to this statement of Rabbah here. It's a very sodistic Shas Svara about Moda b'Miktsas. Moda b'Miktsas is one of those things that come up all the time. And the Gemara asks, why is it that one who admits to half of a loan needs to take a shavua? Moda miktsas hataina yishava. Why is it that when a person agrees to half of a loan that he has to take a shavua? And the Gemara answers. Rabbah explains, Chazaka, we have an pretty much established fact over here. Ein adam meiz panav b'fnei bal chova. A person goes ahead and lends you money. It takes a certain level of chutzpah to go ahead and just say in front of that person's face, the whole thing never happened. Now, if you look at Tosfos, really Rashi seems to explain that a person is kind enough to lend you money. He doesn't have to do that. He's kind enough to lend you money when you need it. It really just takes a certain ha'azah and audacity to go back to the person and say, you did me a favor, you lent me money when I needed it, but you know what I'm going to do to you right now? I'm going to completely deny the whole loan in front of your face. It's just a certain type of ha'azah. But Tosfos says that cannot be the reason. That cannot be the explanation. Why? Because one of the cases that we have Moda b'Miktsas is a case where the person who is admitting actually did the other person a favor. Where is that? By a pikadon. Pikadon is a deposit where a person asks somebody, can you do me a favor and guard my own property? So the person says, I'm going away. I don't have a safety deposit box. I don't want to leave my money in my own house. I'm going to leave $1,000 with you in your house. I'll come back in a week and I'll pick it up. And the person comes back a week later and says, hey, listen, can I have my money back? He says, sure, here's $500. And the person says, $500? I left $1,000. He says, nope, I'm sorry, you left money here, but only $500. That's also Moda b'Miktsas. So that can't be a case, that is not a case where the person did me a favor. I actually did the guy a favor. So Tosfos explains, it's the last line on this page of Tosfos. Hal Omar Rabbeinu Tam, Ta'inu Kegon Chazaka, She'ena Isha Me'iza Paneh B'fnei Ba'ala, She'en L'Adam Panim Lach Barakol. He's talking about a case over there of a woman. In this case, Riva Pirsh Ein Adam Meiz Hecha Shechaveru Maka B'Shikro Ein Laharach. The basic idea, according to Tosfos, is that just regular, normal people just don't have built into them such a level of chutzpah to say something to somebody that person knows is not true. In other words, if a person wants to lie, at least the lie should be with the deception that people will believe you. When a person gets out there and lies to somebody else, a liar a normal liar at least believes that the person who he's lying to buys the story. But it takes a certain level of chutzpah to get out there and to lie and to say things to people that everybody in the room, including yourself, including those who are there no is a false statement. It's just a certain level of ha'azah and chutzpah that normal people don't do that. The chazaka is that most people don't do that. Do people do that sometimes? I don't know. Maybe. In normal society, most normal people don't do that. And that's the chazaka of Modeh Miktzah. So getting back to this. So why does the Torah say that somebody who admits to part of a claim has to take a shavua? Chazaka, there's an established fact. The person doesn't have the audacity to deny an entire loan in front of the person who lent it to him. This guy, really, he's lying, and bekula boy de la kafre. He really wants to deny the whole thing. And the reason why he's not completely denying the loan is because he just doesn't have the chutzpah built into him to lie like that. Therefore, because he does not want to be a liar, he really would admit to the whole loan. Why doesn't he? He's just trying to push it off. In other words, he doesn't have the money available, and instead of having to explain to him that he lost his job, and he owed money to somebody else, and he paid him, and he's getting paid next week, he just denies it. He says, I owe you 50, and he really intends to come back in a week and says, by the way, you know what, the whole thing I told you that last week, about the half loan, I was lying to you, here's the rest of the money. The savar adahav lizuze uparanile. When I get the money, I'll pay him back. So what does the Torah say? Rachmana Amar Rami Shavua Aleha Kihechi Delodi. Give the guy a little bit of a kick in the pants and tell him, listen, all right, no problem. You denied it, we'll take you at your word. Just take an oath. Take an oath, take a Shavua, and once you take the Shavua that you only owe half, then we'll take you at your word. In such a case, the person says, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take an oath, make a false Shavua. I'm not doing that. Now, this is the reason why a Modeh Miktzah has to take a Shavua. Really, essentially says the Gemara, to give the guy a little bit of a kick in the pants to ultimately man up and admit to the whole loan. But this is all based on the concept that a person won't brazenly go out there and deny a loan that he knows, and he knows the other guy knows, and the other guy knows that he knows that he actually owes. So now, Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov Savar, lo shanu bo, lo shna bo, v'lo shna bibno, eino meiz. It doesn't make a difference if you're talking with the actual person who lent the money or the son of the person. Person's just not going to have the chutzpah to deny the loan. He's not really a Meishav Aveda when he agrees that he owes half the money, because it's really not up to him. When you're a normal person, there are certain things that are not up to you. Normal people just don't have it within them to go ahead and lie. And therefore, you're not a Meishav Aveda. You were put on the spot because the person came and claimed the money from you. For Rabbanan Savri, Rabbanan are of the opinion, Bo hu de'eno meiz. In the actual person who lent the money, that's where a person's not going to have the chutzpah to deny the loan. Aval bibno, with his son, meiz, because he thinks maybe the son doesn't really know. I could trick the son, I could fool the son. The son is all confused about his father's estate anyway, and therefore I don't have such a problem denying it to the son. Umidelohe is the fact that he chose not to have the chutzpah to deny the loan. Meishav Aveda Havi, he is considered to be a Meishav Aveda. So that concludes that discussion about Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov and the Chachamim. But again, the conclusion is that everybody agrees to the concept of Meishav Aveda. Everyone agrees that when I go ahead and voluntarily bring myself into a situation of a monetary dispute with somebody, why did I do it? For the sake of trying to give the person back money that he rightfully owes. In such a case, we're not going to impose a shavua on the person to make his life difficult. We're going to try to make life as easy as possible. Why? Because you want to try to encourage, not discourage, good behavior. The poskim discuss this in the various different contexts. How far does this go that when someone is involved in doing something good, that we don't want to make their life difficult? In other words, in this case, it's very direct. I went there to acknowledge a loan. And in acknowledging that loan, I really got myself in trouble, and now I might have to take a shavua based on that loan. What if I was volunteering and doing something for the community? And in the context of volunteering and doing something for the community, somebody accused me of stealing something. So it's really two separate things. I was doing something good for the community, and I could have said, you know what, forget it. No more community service. Here I go out there, I take time out of my day, and I volunteer, and I'm cleaning up the shul, and there I am, and now I have to face all types of accusations that I stole something from the coffee room. Forget it, I'm not doing that anymore. Or do we say, well, you know what? They're really unrelated. If we're going to say that you stole the, the mop. So you were actually there mopping. You're doing something good. But is it actually related to a potential case of theft? So that's where the discussion in the poskim comes out. The bottom line is it really gets very sensitive in different cases. And it's a shaila for a posek. And the Zilberstein actually has a shaila about this Bet Hatzalah guy who was called to someone's home. I think that whatever the guy wasn't well, he called Hatzalah, and he lived alone. And when he got better, he noticed he was missing something from his apartment. So he's thinking, who was the only person who came to my apartment? That Hatzalah guy. So now he wants to go ahead and claim that Hatzalah guy should now have to take a shvua that he didn't steal his stuff. Hatzalah guy says, I came to your house, you weren't feeling well, I took care of you, I put you in the ambulance, and I brought you to the hospital. Why do you think I was stealing your stuff? I wasn't there to steal. I was here to bring you to the hospital. He says, no, you're the only guy who came to my house, and you should take a shvua that he didn't steal it. So do we say this Hatzalah guy is a Meshav Aveda? The Gemara actually says, saving someone's life is a Shavas Aveda. So, and we say he's a Meshav Aveda, he's Pater. Or do we say, it has nothing to do with anything? One case was helping the guy with his medical needs, and now he claims you were in my apartment, you stole something. It's a very good and interesting discussion, but again, generally speaking, everyone agrees with the concept of Meshav Aveda. We don't want to make people's life difficult for them. The question just is, how far does this go that a Meshav Aveda is pater from a Shavua? Does it even go to external circumstances related to the community service that they are doing? The Gemara continues. The Mishnah continues. Now, just by way of introduction, this is a very important Shas sugya called Kiemstaros. This Mishnah is really, and the following Gemara is one of those sugyas that are learned in yeshiva, and it takes, what we're going to learn today in about 15 minutes, takes about 15 weeks in yeshiva to learn. And the reason for that is because every one of these concepts that we're going to bring are concepts that really have all types of depth to them. What is the reason for them? How can you apply them? Under what circumstances do they apply? So I encourage you, if you have some time today is Sunday, to go ahead and look through some of the shiurim online. I can't tell you that I went through them and know which ones to listen to. If you find any of those lumdus on the daf type of shiurim, I encourage you to listen to it because this is really something, a real shas sugya, and the concepts over here are really deep. But we're going to go through it in as clear a fashion as possible, but as well we have to finish by the time today's shir is over. Now, there is an idea called Kiemstaros, which is the following. Midoraisa, from the Torah's perspective, if you have a shtar, you have a contract, the contract is written properly, and it is signed, it is valid, and it can be used to extract money or to keep money. That's the halacha. Whatever the shtar is intended to do will work as long as it is written and it is signed. Nevertheless, Chazal instituted something called Kiemstaros. So midrabanan, there is an idea that you have to actually authenticate the shtar, which means that technically anybody can go ahead and write a shtar and forge signatures. I could write anybody's name. How do we avoid that from happening? We have the concept of Kiemstaros. What does Kiemstaros mean? Kiemstaros is when the Eidim themselves can verify that it is their signature on the document. There are a number of ways of doing it. Either the actual witnesses walk in and say, oh, that shtar, yeah, that's my signature. I signed that paper. Or another way of doing it is that other people come in and testify, I recognize the signature of this person. Could be I worked with him, or I've seen his signature a number of times. This looks like his signature. Another way of doing it is Ksav Yodam Yotzim Makim Acher, where we have other documents that were signed by these Eidim, and that other document was already authenticated in another way. So here we have the following case. Ha'edim sha'amru, Eidim came, they looked at a shtar, and they said, Ksav Yodenu huzeh. This indeed is my signature. Aval anusim hayinu. When I signed that shtar, I did it under duress. I did not sign that shtar really because the information on the shtar is correct. I signed it because the person who wrote it forced me to sign it. Or ketana hayinu. Yeah, it's my signature, but I was 7 years old when I signed it, and therefore my signature is worthless. Or psuli edis hayinu. I was not kosher as an aid to sign it. It's true that I signed it, but I was not somebody who was able to sign the shtar. Says the Mishnah Harel Ne'emanim. Now let's just point out, when it comes to psuli edus, Rashi says krovim o mesachakim bekuvya. Either they were related, so the person's an upstanding citizen, but he's just pasal for edus in this particular case because he's related to the person who's involved. Rashi adds in mesachakim bekuvya, which is that this person was involved in shady business. It literally means people who play with cubes, which is a game. Now, it's a game which is gambling. Now, getting to the sugya of gambling doesn't mean that anybody who ever played poker is going to be pasal edus. What the Rav explains, and the Meshita Mekabetzes discusses this in Yeshua, it's talking about somebody whose entire life and the entire parnasa and everything they do is involved in this, and that's considered somebody who's eino misasik b'yeshuva shel olam. The person is not doing something at all which helps society by sitting there playing games their whole life. So a person like that is pasal for edus. Now, the problem is others disagree with Rashi because a person's not neman, we're going to see very soon, to turn themselves into a rasha. So if a person comes by and says, it's my signature, but I'm pasal edus. Why am I pasal edus? Because I have the following flaw in my character. You're not neman to say that about yourself. You can't testify about yourself that you're a rasha. So therefore, I think Tamid Rabbeinu Yonah actually writes this, that most understand that when you say you're pasal for edus, it just means that you are not kosher in this particular case because of your family relationship. Now, the next question becomes, so how am I ne'eman now to testify about the case to say that the shtar is pasal? So they come up with a case where it was you were related to the person through marriage, and that marriage dissolved. So therefore, at the time, what you're saying is, at the time that I signed the shtar, I was related, so therefore, I was not a kosher witness. But now, that is taken care of. That's over. The person died, or the marriage is no longer relevant. In such a case, he's ne'eman. All right, the Mishnah continues. What if we were able to authenticate the shtar? Because Eidim came and said, oh, we know these signatures, I recognize these signatures, and therefore the shtar is authentic, the shtar is verified. We had another shtar that has their signature, an identical signature, and that shtar was authenticated, or that shtar was verified in another way. Einam ne'emanim, they're not believed to say that when we signed it, we were not kosher Eidim. In other words, a very similar halacha to we had before. The same concept of pesha asu or pesha hitter. I am the one who comes and says the shtar is kosher. I'm the one who points out that the signature of the Eidim is good because I verified that it was me who signed it, but I throw something in there and say, while it's true that I signed it, I'm the guy, I'm just letting you know that signature was not a valid signature because of some external circumstances. Either I was related, or I didn't want to sign it, and all the information in there is false, or I was a katan, I was a child, and I couldn't sign it. But either way, if you're the one who verifies it, you can go ahead and disqualify it. But if it's verified through an outside source, you don't have the right to disqualify it. Amar Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama says, Lo shanu, this Mishnah was not learned, Ela sha'amru anusim hayinu machmas mamo. When a person says they were forced to sign it, that's only when they say they were forced by virtue of monetary reasons. Aval anusim hayinu machmas tefashos. If a person says, if I was forced because my life was threatened, harei elu ne'emanim. So if you look at Rashi, Rashi understands that at this point, the Gemara is saying on the following case. In other words, lo shanu t'im ksav yadon yotzi b'makim acher ein ne'emanim. That we learned that you're not believed if your signature came from another place, that's only if you're saying that you are forced through monetary reasons. So the Gemara says, "Amalei Rava called Kamine." Would we actually believe the person to say that? Kiven shehigid, shevene chozer magid. So this is a very loaded line, but in a very simple understanding of this is a person gets one shot at Eidos. Eidos is such a powerful thing. It says in the pasuk, "Apishnayim edim yakum davar." We establish facts based on the utterance of Eidim, based on what two Eidim say. If that fact is only a fact until you come back and say another fact, it's not a fact. So therefore, there's a concept of Kiven Shehegid. Once you say Eidos, the Eidos sticks, and you don't have the ability to be able to come back and say, well, you know what, I actually want to take that back. Once you say Eidos, you're not believed even against yourself. If you establish a fact with the power of Eidos, you can't come back later and uproot that fact. So now the Gemara says, you signed a shtar. You signed a shtar. Now, why should you be believed to say that you were forced because of monetary reasons? In other words, this line can't be true that when it comes to monetary reasons, when it comes to that he was forced because his life was at risk. In such a case, why would you be believed? Your first Eidah stands. So Gemara says, if you're going to suggest Hani Mili Al Peh, Avol Bishtar La, that's only true when the first Eidos was verbal Eidos, but not written Eidos. It's not true. When there's Eidim signed on a shtar, on a contract, it's as if Beis Din put this person through the full extent of cross-examination. In other words, we take it as real eidos. The Gemara says, itmar, itmar. We're misunderstanding this concept. In other words, we thought at the beginning that when we were differentiating between an ones, a situation of duress, and we said that it's only that you're only not believed when it's a monetary duress, but if it's actually threatening your life, you would be believed even if there is external evidence which verified and authenticated the shtar. That's not true. That can't be true. Because if we authenticate the shtar, other people come by and say the shtar is valid, there is no backing out. You can't uproot that. Eidos is Eidos and it's final. It can't be changed. So rather, when this line was said that there's a differentiation and there's a distinction between an onus, a monetary onus, and a nefashos, a life-threatening onus, must have been Aryeh in the first half. And it goes as follows: Harei elu ne'emanim. If a person comes by and authenticates the shtar by saying, I signed it, but I was an ones. They are only believed if they say, it is my signature, but I was forced. What type of force was it? The person threatened to take my life. If a person says, I was an onus because a person threatened to take my money, they're not believed. My taima, why not? Adam mesim atzmo rasha. A person is not believed to tell us something which makes him a rasha. Essentially, the person is saying that I am willing to sign on a shtar, which is going to cost somebody else money, to save me money. It's a horrible thing to do. A person would be a rasha for doing that. I would go ahead and sign a false document which obligates someone else to pay money. Why? To save me from paying money? That's terrible. What kind of behavior is that? So therefore, in such a case, he is not believed. Now, there's a concept here which I can't leave the Amud without pointing out, which is called Pagina Dibura. Pagina Dibura is, again, a fascinating sugya, but a Pagina Dibura literally means we split the person's words. And sometimes this happens when you're analyzing what a person says, you recognize that there's a story here to be said, but we don't want to take the person entirely at their words. So Tosha says, why can't we say in this case that a person says, it's my signature, Ksav Yadenu Huzeh, Aval Anusim Hayinu. We were forced. What type of onus was it? I was forced for monetary reasons. Why don't we say, it's true that you were forced, but you're just not giving all the information, and we'll assume that really the force that happened was that you were forced with a life-threatening situation. In other words, why don't we take you at your word that there was some type of external duress over here, but we'll say, listen, the fact that you're mentioning that it was an onus mammon, we're not going, which is just a financial stress, we can't believe you on that because it turns you into a rasha. But we'll assume that it was a different type of onus, which was much more severe. And Tosfos says we would do that, except for the fact that how often is it something like this happens that a person forces somebody at gunpoint to sign a shtar? It's just not a normal case. So if there was some type of normal situation that we can finish your sentence with, we would. But if we have to finish your sentence with a bizarre circumstance that a person came by and threatened to kill you, if you're not going to sign a shtar, those are just not everyday things that happen in most normal societies. We have some more time. Let's go a little bit further. Tana Rabbanan. Ein ne'emanim leposlo. This is going back, as Rashi points out in the first part of the Mishnah. In other words, the Aryeh masnisin polig ha'edim she'amru ksav yadenuhu aval anusim hayinu. The Rabbanan said he's not ne'eman to ruin the shtar. Divi Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. In other words, either are not believed to ruin what appears to be a valid, authentic shtar. Chachamim omrim, ne'emanim, they are believed to ruin the shtar. So bishlam al Rabbanan ki tamayu, according to Rabbanan, it makes sense, which is sha pesha asu ha pesha hitir. You are the one who validated the shtar by saying we signed it, and therefore you can disqualify it by saying that while you signed it, you were forced to sign it. El Rabbi Meir, my time, according to Rabbi Meir, why are you not believed to disqualify the shtar? Bishlam psuli edus. It would make sense when it comes to psuli edus, because you could say, Malva gufei meikara medik dayik. What are you going to tell me that you are apostle for edus? You are a relative. The guy is lending money here. And the guy is going out of his way to write a shtar to make sure that his loan is collectible. He's not going to realize he shouldn't ask the person's brother-in-law to sign the shtar. The malva, the one who lends the money, is going to be careful not to have relatives or someone else who's apostle for edus to sign the shtar. So he won't, Medik Daik, Umechtam, he'll get good people to sign it. Ketanim Navi, Rish Lakish, Ketanim also, just like Rish Lakish, Rish Lakish, Chazaka Eina Edim Chasumin al Shtarim Kinas Begado. This is a Chazaka that Edim don't sign a shtar unless there are adults there. People are not spending their time with child's play. So if there are children there signing shtars, other people don't sign it, they don't get involved. So therefore, it's very rare that should come up. Allah Nusim. Why, according to Meir, are you not believed to say you were an ones? The Gemara says, Amr of Chista, Kasavar of Meir, Edim she'amru lehem chist musheker. Edim, who are told, sign falsely on this line. Sign a false document. What does he say? Chist musheker v'al taharogu. Sign falsely on this document and I won't kill you. In other words, it's a very nice way of saying, if you don't sign on the shtar, I'm going to kill you. Says Rav Chista, that Rav Meir is of the opinion that Yaharogu v'al yichasmu. Person should choose to lose their life better than to sign sheker. So again, Edim she'amru lehem chismu sheker v'al taharogu. Sign falsely and I won't kill you. What's the halacha? Yaharogu, let yourself be killed. V'al yichasmu sheker, and do not sign falsely. So Amalei Rava, Hashta ilu asalu kaman, if someone came to his Rav and asked a Shaila, and Lemlucha, ilu asalu kaman lemluche, Amrin lehu zilu chasumu v'alot tiskatlon, we never would paskin that a person should actually lose their life over a false signature. We know there are 3 cardinal sins, Gila Rayas, Shvichas Damim, and Avodah Zarah. But it doesn't say anywhere that a person is obligated to give up his life not to sign falsely. So if they came to ask us this, Shiloh, we would say that yes, it's better to sign falsely than to lose your life. It's only those 3 things. So now, now that they did it, You can say to them, hey, why'd you sign? You should have let yourself be killed. That's not true. If I would have asked you, would have said, don't be killed. Rav Meir's reasoning is like Rav Huna. Rav Meir's reason is entirely different. Nothing to do with this wild idea that a person should give up their life not to sign a star falsely. Rather, Rav Meir's opinion is, once a star is written, it no longer needs to have Kiemstaros. In other words, he's of the opinion that this Keemstars is extra credit, but the star works. The star is written, the star is signed, the star is valid. You don't need to authenticate it. So therefore, the fact that you are coming there and authenticating it is really not a big deal because we don't need you. So if we don't need you to authenticate it, you don't have the ability to disqualify it. That's the opinion of Rav Meir. We will stop here. Have a wonderful day and have a wonderful week.